Today, we're going back to basics on deterrence. We're asking whether Taiwan can build enough deterrence before 2027, the year that Xi Jinping has asked his military to prepare for a Taiwan contingency. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. My guests are Gemont Nalari, a retired US Air Force Foreign Area Officer specializing in counterterrorism, irregular warfare and missile defense. He was an United States Air Force attaché in the Middle East and served in Iraq. Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs sponsored him as a Taiwan Fellow during 2022, and he will continue his research in 2023 at National Zhengzhou University in Taipei. And Vincent Chow, a Taipei City Councillor and former Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, or TECRO, US Political Division Director. He is also currently Adjunct Fellow at CSIS's Asia Program and China Power Project. And earlier, our political editor Rath Wang spoke to Wang Dingyu, DPP legislator and the convener of the Legislative Yuan's Foreign and National Defense Committee. Gemont and Vincent, a very warm welcome to the show today. According to the United States military, deterrence prevents enemy action through the presentation of a credible threat to that adversary, leading to the belief that the risk outweighs the benefits. Deterrence should be based on capability, credibility, and communication, or the 3 C's. Capability, having the means to influence the enemy's behavior to ensure that aggression against the US allies and partners will fail and carry the credible risk of intolerable consequences for the adversary. Credibility, maintaining a level of believability that the proposed actions may actually be employed. Credibility depends on the appearance of the deterrent from the adversary's point of view. And communication, transmitting the intended message to the desired audience, the message that those capabilities will deny benefits to the adversary and impose unacceptable costs on them. Messaging opportunities include weapons system testing, alert posturing, and shows of force. In summary, deterrence, quote, prevents adversary action through the presentation of a credible threat of unacceptable counteraction and the belief that the cost of the action outweighs the perceived benefits. Gemont, if I can start with you today. So how would you say Taiwan scores in each of these 3 areas, and why?
So I think overall Taiwan scores a medium in all 3 areas because Taiwan does have a military. It has an Air Force, it has a Navy, it has an Army, and they are able to communicate their capability through demonstrating reactions to the PLA whenever the PLA flies its aircraft in the Aegis, in the airspace near Taiwan. The Navy ships respond to the PLA Navy's activities. And in a variety of ways, Taiwan has been resisting aggression by the PLA for a long time. And so they've built up a reasonably strong military, and of course they can improve it. And that's why I in each of those areas, I give them a medium score.
Vincent, your assessment?
I think I would broadly share that assessment. I think in terms of capability, Taiwan probably scores a C, but improving. So C plus in a sense that, we've had a military in the past that has served its purposes kind of in the past, but may not necessarily have the same deterrence factor in comparison with Chinese PLA's rapid modernization program. And so I do think that we're on the right track. We're not quite there yet, but we're improving in ways I think that would have a credible impact. In terms of credibility and communication, I think the Chinese understand at this point that Taiwan is prepared to defend itself and that we have a high degree of trust, also a high degree of credibility within our own democratic system. At the same time, I do think the Chinese will continue to use elements, including gray zone tactics and so forth, try to influence discourse here to try to weaken that resolve domestically. And so I think it's up to us to sort of communicate that resolve effectively through both words and action. So I do think that, broadly speaking, we are on the same page. I do think Taiwan is moving in the right direction. I think we still have a lot of work to do. We're not quite there yet, but hopefully in a couple of years' time, I think we'll be in a position where we feel a lot more comfortable in.
Gemont, there might be a few people who think that China actually outguns Taiwan.
So I think that's if you look at that analysis, I think it's a mistake. because if you strictly look at just numbers, of course, the PLA outnumbers Taiwan's or the Iraq military. But don't forget, the PLA has to protect all of China. Okay, and so it has a huge border with India. So a lot of their forces are deployed there. You can't say all of the PLA is arrayed against Taiwan. That's a mistake. Second of all, as a defender, Taiwan, if you're in the defense scenario, you're defending your homeland, you're defending your family, you're just defending yourself, you have much greater will to fight. Whereas the PLA is not defending their home, they're not defending their family, they're not defending themselves, they're attacking. And so the defender always has the upper hand in terms of numbers. We can get into that if you'd like, but I would say that that logic is false because of the fact that, for example, all of the PLA Air Force can't be used against Taiwan. That's not reasonable. And the Iraq Air Force has 400 or 500 aircraft to counteract anything that the PLA Air Force could show. That's just a simple example.
Vincent, so the credibility in the communication from China, however, is very strong, right?
I think the Chinese have made clear, sort of clear red lines that they've drawn over time. And of course, you know, they've made everything a red line these days. But if we look throughout the past 4 decades, it's been pretty consistent in terms of having no U.S. troops here based in Taiwan, having no nuclear weapons, and no de jure declaration of independence. And so I think we do have to be a bit clear-eyed in terms of its consistency throughout history, in terms of at least the PRC in Taiwan. But you know, more broadly speaking, I do think that the PRC has communicated quite clearly that they're willing to suffer consequences and they're willing to make sacrifices to engage in political aims. And especially as Xi Jinping enters a potential 4th term in 2027, I do think he will have a lot of political impetus to make progress on Taiwan, either through political or military means. And I mean, the economy is a given at this point. And so I think how he chooses to manage that risk and mitigate risk while at the same time trying to achieve these political objectives will be a tough job for him, but one nevertheless, I think he'll face significant pressure on. So, you know, back to this point we've spoken about 2027, you know, there's a lot of things coming in play in 2027. There's the political arena, like I said, with Xi Jinping's 4th term. There's also the military arena with the PLA having the capabilities at that point to be able to mitigate their risk of invasion in Taiwan. But there's also a lot of, I think, geopolitics surrounding that as well, including Taiwan's potential presidential elections then as well. So I do think we have to be clear-eyed in terms of looking not only at the threat we face today, but also the threat we face potentially in 27 and beyond.
Mm-hmm. I would make some comments on what Vincent has said. Writ large, what he pointed out is maybe half the cup empty, half the cup full kind of argument. I would argue that yes, there's a lot of bluster from the CCP in terms of making threatening comments and doing things that might appear to be aggressive. But if you noticed recently, at the end of December, the United States passed a law, the National Defense Authorization Act, which clearly stated that the United States military will be conducting training with the Taiwanese military and will be giving grants or loans of $2 billion. And the response from China, or the CCP, was muted. And it's muted because right now I believe the CCP is very weak because of their COVID policy and because of their economy. So not everything is as strong as people think the CCP is. Second of all, I would say that strategically, the CCP has 2 strategic weaknesses. One is that it depends on food from the outside. So if there's a war between Taiwan and the PLA, if the rest of the world stops sending food to the PRC, in a few months, people start starving in China. And that's a problem, and they're dependent on that. So that's a big fear, is that if there's a war with Taiwan, if the war lasts too long, then people start starving. Number 2 is the fact that the CCP imposed a one-child policy in 1980 and continued it until 2015. And as a result, most of the military personnel that are currently in the PLA are from one-child families. And so if you start killing lots of PLA soldiers, the future of those families is dead. And so I don't think that the PLA or the CCP can handle lots of casualties. So these are just two examples, for example, that I'm trying to point out that the giant isn't as big as you think.
The cost actually is actually very, very significant and not immediately obvious on the surface.
Right.
Okay. So now, taking each of the three C's in turn, let's look first at capability. Capability can include weapons and training, many other things. For Taiwan to defend itself against missiles from China, it must have an adequate air defense weapons system. Taiwan Plus's Jaime Ocon and Klein Wang find out how Taiwan's indigenous Tiankong or Skybow missile systems are being repositioned to better protect Taiwan.
This is the Tiankong or Skybow missile defense system. It's Taiwan's most advanced domestically made air defense system, and it's tasked with protecting the skies above the country. Recently, the military has been repositioning these systems to protect more of the north, highlighting that the country is always looking to better enhance its defenses.
天宫3型飞弹具有很好的征收的能力，相位阵列雷达可以征收大概400公里左右的空域，可以让我国的防空网就是更为绵密，可以拦截高中低空各种不同目标。
Taiwan has two main air defense systems, the Patriot system from the US and the domestically made Skybow system. These systems are crucial for giving the entirety of Taiwan cover against enemy aircraft and missiles. China, which sits roughly 100 kilometers away from Taiwan at the closest point, has continually threatened the country with military force to bring it under its control. Recently, a U.S. Air Force commander highlighted 2025 as a potential year for a conflict to break out. But Taiwan's defense minister says no matter what timeline, the military must be ready.
对任何一个可能发生的事情啊，我们都要有个预应啊。目前国防部也朝这一方面在着手，好吧？这个我不好妄加评断啊。有什么可能，我们都会纳入考虑，来做一个准备。
As Taiwan continues to step up its security planning, it's also adapting to a changing security environment. The repositioning of the Skybow missile system is one way that the country is seeking to cover all bases. Klein Wang and Jaime Ocon for Taiwan Plus.
That report by Jaime Ocon and Klein Wang. As mentioned, we can look at capability from the perspective of weapons and training. Before we get into the defensive weapons systems that we saw in that news report, let's talk about offensive weapons. Gemont, you've written in an Epoch Times article about the defense minister of Ukraine saying that, they didn't want to give us heavy artillery, then they did. They didn't want to give us HIMARS, and then they did. They didn't want to give us tanks, and then they did. What, in your view, is the difference between the needs of Ukraine and Taiwan when it comes to offensive weaponry?
So I would argue that Taiwan needs the full spectrum of weapon systems that any country, let's say in NATO, has.
So not just asymmetric?
No, symmetric and asymmetric. If you focus too much, just to answer your question, if you focus too much on asymmetric, then the adversary will use other means or other focus areas. For example, asymmetric is used as a concept for an invasion. But what happens if the PLA is ordered to do a blockade around Taiwan? Then the asymmetric concept is useless because the asymmetric focuses on the land war, doesn't focus in on a blockade scenario. Or let's say a strike, a strategic strike, thousands of missiles coming at Taiwan. This is not a way, the asymmetric does not solve that problem. So in general, the offensive weapons, it needs the full spectrum. And as the war in Ukraine has demonstrated, just having javelin missiles to destroy tanks or armor isn't sufficient. Just having artillery isn't sufficient. Taiwan needs the full spectrum, and it does have the full spectrum. Now, the quantities could be increased to create more deterrence because the pain of attacking Taiwan could be increased, increasing deterrence.
Vincent, but Taiwan is being encouraged to just focus on asymmetric weapons by the current Biden administration.
I don't think Taiwan is quite being focused, is quite being told to focus just on asymmetric, but to rather tweak the emphasis in terms of our defense resources. I think in an infinite defense environment, I mean, it's absolutely true. We should buy everything we can. I mean, anything adds, even if a little bit, onto Taiwan's defense matrix. But in a finite defense environment, particularly one as finite as Taiwan's current defense budget, we do have to make choices. And I do think that at this point, it makes a bit more sense to focus a bit more on weaponry that are nimble, survivable, and essentially do not cost as much as heavy hardware does. And I do think that Taiwan in the past has had this emphasis on very heavy conventional weaponry, large naval frigates, submarines, aircraft, and so forth. I'm not saying they're not important. I think there are specific scenarios in which all of these equipment would be extremely useful. But in terms of the broader picture, in terms of the threat Taiwan faces the most, in terms of the existentialist threat that we faced in an invasion scenario, I do think we need to refocus defense priorities to focus a bit more on having the capabilities, including, for example, anti-ship missiles in sufficient quantities to counter such a scenario from taking place.
Gilmore, you would agree with the anti-ship missiles, but you probably don't agree with, the fact that I believe you've written that a blockade and strike is actually more likely than a D-Day invasion.
Especially a blockade. A strike has minimal risk for the PLA because they're sending missiles, they're not sending soldiers out, or Navy or sailor or airmen. And a blockade would be less kinetic, in other words, less things destroyed, but over a period of time it could also choke Taiwan. And so unfortunately, when you're designing a strategy that will counter your adversary, you can't just focus on one. If you do, then the adversary will then divert. So if we focus on, for example, the invasion scenario to the point where the other options become more appealing to the PLA, then we lose. So that is why, for example, I would recommend not only spending the money that the current government has suggested, but Taiwan has a huge amount of money available in its foreign assets.
Offset program.
Yeah, it has $500 billion worth of money. I think now it's time to invest some of that money to purchase additional systems, and if not, produce them here.
So I think you're referring to spending some of our accumulated foreign capital reserves. And I do think that we can be in agreement that it's probably the best thing for Taiwan to do is to spend as much money as feasibly possible in our political and economic environment on defense in the next few years to ensure that we have sufficient capabilities. And I do think that it was kind of a shame that the US Congress decided to not go the way of grants and instead chose loans in terms of what ended up being passed in the NDAA. I do think that grants would have made a much more, positive influence in not only providing sufficient financial resources in as short a period as possible, but also ensuring that there's that political symbolism of the U.S. really standing by Taiwan during these trying times. But I do think that ultimately it does come back to Taiwan, and it is up to Taiwan to ensure that we have sufficient defense capabilities in the next few years and beyond.
I would point out that the law that was passed has a caveat for grants. The actual money that is being allocated is a loan for now. And I think that's a message to the Taiwanese government to say, you spend the money now on the loan, and maybe in the future we'll give you a grant. That's what I see it as. And so I think it's encouraging Taiwan to spend some of that capital money that it has instead of getting free money from the United States.
Gilmore, so you did mention about acquire or make your own. Taiwan is making its own long-range missiles. It's actually have been developed, as you know, from Israeli weapons, among them the Xiongfeng missiles with a range of 1,000 kilometers. So let's talk about how many of these offensive weapons Taiwan actually needs. How much is the shortfall?
Okay, so I probably am not going to answer the question about numbers because I don't know how many what they have, and all I would say is the more the better. Okay.
Okay.
And if let's say their production rate is X, I think they should try to double it or triple it.
So in terms of prioritization of particular
Right.
offensive weapons.
Right. So as Vincent said, I agree that one of the areas that should be focused on is the anti-ship missiles. Buying Harpoon from the United States is great. Buying other weapon systems from other countries if they're willing to sell them, and I believe Taiwan has its own anti-ship missiles, which Israel again provided a long time ago. The Gabriel missile, which Taiwan modified for its own system.
Zhongfeng, yes.
Zhongfeng, yes. So again, that's one area in terms of deterring the PLA. I think, for example, the sale of the Seahawk helicopters that was stopped last year by the current administration should be reopened. The Seahawk is designed for countering adversary submarines. It's an anti-submarine warfare capable ship, and it's also, aircraft, and it's also used to insert special forces. The current Seahawks are very old, and also the E-2K or the command and control aircraft that the Taiwanese Air Force uses to detect ships and aircraft that are flying around Taiwan is another useful tool, especially as in the beginning of the battle. This system would help target adversary systems.
Vincent, so why have things like that been stopped? Is it because, there is this China narrative that, if you cross this red line, as you mentioned, have offensive weapons, if the US sells offensive weapons to Taiwan and it's crossing a red line, it's provoking us?
No, I don't think that applies in this case. We're talking about anti-sub, the Romeo helicopters, and as well as the potential new purchase of E-2Ds, which are reconnaissance aircraft. I think all of these are capabilities Taiwan has had in the past. I do think that there are concerns both in Taiwan itself but also in the US, particularly if you talk with members of the defense establishment, but that these are purchases that come with extremely high price tags. These are multi-billion-dollar weaponry. And I think there is that question about whether, number one, whether they can be sustained through public finances, but also number two, whether they would have the most punch for the buck. So to say, at this time, when we do face such a pressing and urgent threat from the PLA. And so I do think that there are calls, not only here within Taiwan, but within the US, to try to find better uses of that money and to ensure that this money really goes into weaponry that could deter an invasion scenario, for example. And we did mention that there are different scenarios that come into play. I've participated in several war games in the past, and certainly all of these scenarios, I think, have been considered. I do think that Taiwan at this point faces the one single existential scenario that terrifies us all, which is invasion. That certainly does not mean that's the only scenario, but that does mean that at this point, this should be the one we should be most prepared to deal with.
Let's quickly move on to the Volcano anti-tank mine-laying system, which Taiwan is purchasing from the US, because we've got a few more minutes left. Let's hear now from DPP legislator Wang Dingyi. He told Rath Wang that there are 14 coasts that are open to amphibious landing. Let's take a look at Wang Dingyi's comments.
When China tried to attack Taiwan, they are using their boat to transport their Marines, their soldiers, China soldiers, to across the Taiwan Strait. It takes hours. So at that moment, it's a perfect moment to dispense this volcano mine in some certain area suitable for amphibious landing. There are only 3 countries have this system: United States, Korea, and Taiwan. Korea, they are facing North Korea. Taiwan, we are facing the same situation. China, they put a lot of national defense budget resources, try to establish their amphibious capacity. And they are using their transportation system. They have military exercise, try to transport their tank personnel to Taiwan to land our coastline. So Taiwan and Korea, we are facing very similar threat. So this system is quite useful to establish defense line, slow down enemies' tank threat in very short time. Couple hours can establish a very concrete obstacles for their landing tank or amphibious boat.
Gimont, so this obviously is again addressing the invasion scenario, and it's providing kind of like a barrier, isn't it, for the invading tanks and troops coming through. How important do you think these are in relation to, say, like the air defense systems? You've also talked about, you know, even THAAD being repositioned on Taiwan. How do we understand the relationship between all of these defense systems?
So initially, when it was announced that Taiwan was going to purchase these and the U.S. government was going to allow it, the CCP, through its mouthpieces in the PRC, screamed that this is a waste, this is going to cause all kinds of silly excuses. And so whenever the PRC, the CCP, does something like that, that's a good sign, because the angrier they get, the better it is, in my opinion, because obviously it creates a sense of deterrence. They realize that if they go on a beach and these mines are there, their armor or whatever they bring to the beach is at risk. So that's good. One of the things that I think is useful too, and I'm not sure if Taiwan is going to do this, but it's definitely an option, is they can use this also on the islands, Kinmen, Penghu, and it's a great system, especially if they're going to be attacked. So the more the merrier, in my opinion. Now, going to THAAD and other systems that you mentioned, I think THAAD is a great system. I've worked with it. And of course, the PRC is going to complain about it, just like they did with South Korea. But you know, what did they cause a war? No. They caused some economic pain to South Korea. They made them sign some documents. No. But in the end, the THAAD is still there. The THAAD is in Guam. There's a reason for it, because it's effective against long-range missiles. So this is the strike scenario. And furthermore, the U.S. could put some Aegis anti-missile ships off the coast of Taiwan and help protect, again, against these missiles that could come from... and I think the missile scenario could come in conjunction with the invasion scenario. So it has overlapping. These weapon systems are not singular focused. They have overlapping things. That's why I argue that the full spectrum of military weapon systems need to be available to Taiwan to deal with various threats. And who knows, it could be a blockade followed by an invasion.
Yeah, I mean, that's one scenario I think that's been covered in past war game exercises as well, is that a blockade could very well be a feint before an actual invasion. But I think Guermont is absolutely right in the sense that, I mean, essentially we're talking about equipment, we're talking about capabilities that are not offensive in nature, but are defensive in nature. So it becomes, I think, very tenuous, this PRC argument that by having THAAD or having other defensive equipment, you're causing war. No, we're trying to protect ourselves from the threat of Chinese missiles. And I do think that, you know, at this point, there should be a rigorous discussion about potentially having capabilities that may be on the same length or on par with such either domestically built or through foreign transfers. So I do think that this is a good discussion to have, and hopefully, you know, this whole domestic controversy about Volcano, this Volcano capability, I do think that that has sparked a greater interest, and sort of what are the more out-of-the-box things that we should be thinking about. I mean, we think about tanks and fighter planes all the time because that's what we see, but we don't see we don't normally think about vehicles that can shoot mines out like a Volcano or smart sea mines or you know, anti-long-range missile capabilities and so forth. And I think that's precisely the sort of discussion we should be having a bit more here.
Absolutely, and what Guermont said, which is, you know, to be armed to a similar, or at least the range as NATO. As NATO members. I mean, you've also written about the Aegis, the air defense systems attached to ships. You know, South Korea, Australia have this system.
Right. So they have the air defense version. Japan has the anti-missile system. and Canada is going to be getting it as well. And so I could foresee a scenario where the U.S. has its destroyer cruiser that are Aegis capable, rotating with Japan, rotating with Canada off the coast of Taiwan, international waters. And their purpose is to make sure that the PLA doesn't get excited and start launching missiles at Taiwan. And this is, again, a deterrent type activity. As Vincent said, it serves no offensive measure. However, it sends a message to the people in Beijing, reminding them that, you know, their effectiveness is reduced as a result of having those weapon systems available.
Coming up, we discuss the Israeli Defense Forces. Their purpose, they say, is to, quote, protect the existence of the State of Israel, its independence, and the security of its citizens and residents. Let's take a look.
On the Hanukkah menorah, the main candle is called the shamash. This is the highest candle, and it's used to light the other candles. What gives you light? What keeps you alive? Our light comes from our families, our friendship, our values, our effort, our humanity, our work, our gratitude, our motivation. What is our shamash? Love for our country. That is our light. What we pass to one another. How about you? How do you spread the love?
But first, let's take a look at Taiwan's military training. We're still within the capability element of deterrence. Jaime Ocon and James Rayner find out what role the road to heaven plays in Taiwan's toughest Navy boot camp.
This is the road to heaven, a 100-meter path that separates ordinary soldiers from Taiwan's most elite naval force, the Amphibious Reconnaissance and Patrol Unit, more commonly known as Frogmen, Taiwan's equivalent to a U.S. Navy SEAL. These Marines are at the end of a brutal 12-week training course, the last 10 days which are spent performing exercises like this.
最难的我觉得是时间的调配，因为它中间没有休息，就是可能只有4-5分钟让你去厕所或者是喝水，然后就要继续进行下一个科目，连续的6天5夜。
Many trainees fade in and out of consciousness from the fatigue. But the exercises are meant to develop an iron will, which they'll need to complete specialized missions as frogmen.
不怕死。
为什么不怕死？
因为我爱我的国家，我爱台湾，为台湾付出生命是一定要的。
In the event of war with China, which claims Taiwan as a breakaway province, these trainees will find themselves on the front line, scouting enemy positions and calling in attacks. In training, they spend much of their time in the water. As Taiwan is an island nation, these future frogmen need to learn how to hold their breath and stay submerged with full combat gear. Of the 31 who started the course, only 15 finished. Taiwan hopes these new frogmen will serve as inspiration for the next generation of soldiers tasked with safeguarding the island. James Rayner and Jaime Ocon for Taiwan Plus.
That report by Jaime Ocon and James Rayner. Gemont, so let's talk about the training of Taiwan's troops. You've said that Taiwan's manpower needs to be fully trained and mission ready. So what does it mean to be mission ready?
It means that it has to be able to deal with those different scenarios that we mentioned before. And it means that their training has to be continuous. In other words, they get their initial training. There should be a maintenance training program where they maintain their capabilities that they've initially acquired. And if there's new lessons learned from other combat scenarios, for example, in the Ukraine, there are lessons learned they can learn from them, lessons learned from the United States, from other countries. All these things should be used to update their training. So what I mean by this comment is that I don't know. I haven't worked with the Taiwanese military, but I do know that the whole idea of training is a continuously improving process, And I think the Taiwanese military needs to consider other training methods to enhance and improve. Furthermore, the reservists, the 1.5 million Taiwanese in reserve to the military, their maintenance training needs to also go through this rigorous review of what exactly do they know and don't know, and what they need to update their skills, what areas. So I know, for example, the new law that was passed for this year, they're doubling the number of bullets that are being shot, et cetera. So this is what I'm talking about.
Vincent.
I mean, if we look at the lessons of Ukraine and Russia, I mean, that was probably paramount amongst them, this idea of having effective use of your reserves. I mean, Russia had this huge manpower advantage to start, and I think fully utilized it. But I think throughout the process, maybe have neglected the fact that, you know, Ukraine has been fighting a continuous war in the Donbass for the past 8 years, and they've had about 600,000 troops that have cycled in and out, conscripts and reservists that have cycled in and out of Donbass that had some sort of combat training and would be able to quickly adapt on the battlefield. And so Taiwan, number one, effectively using these reserves would be key. But also number two, I think having a more modernized training regime. And that's precisely what was referred to, in a sense that the president had a few weeks ago said that not only would we revive the one-year conscription training program, but also have a more modernized training regime, in a sense that we're going to drop some of the things that may not make as much sense today, like, for example, like having, like, you know, bayonet training and blade training and so forth, and sort of using some of the time to for example, having training regimens for Stinger missiles and javelins and so forth. And so, you know, we really do have to update that training program, and it's sort of a shame we didn't do so in the past, but we're happily catching up now. But I think on top of that, what we really need to do is in terms of our regular forces, in terms of our 50,000 active forces, ensuring that they have highly specialized training. I think that's really going to be important, because, you know, you're going to have 1.5 million reserves as basically doing grunt work. You're going to have a lot of conscripts coming in and out, and that, you know, but you need to have a core contingent of troops that have received highly specialized training and would be able to utilize that in the battlefield. And there's going to be a lot of adaptation and improvisation on a battlefield. I mean, I've spoken with senior U.S. defense policymakers that have said that you can do all the training you want, but when the first bullet flies, I mean, all that training goes out the window. And so we also need to think about our officer training, our NCO training. We have to think about how our soldiers are able to react and adapt and improvise under stress and so forth. And I think all of this goes into this new matrix of this idea that we really need this military that is capable of dealing with the 21st century PLA and not what we envision it to be 30, 40 years ago.
I think the morale is important, as was shown in the video of these frogmen. And I think the morale of the people of Taiwan needs to also be addressed in terms of encouraging and promoting the idea of nationalism, even though that might not be a topic of interest for politicians. But the idea of being proud of your
as we saw in the Israeli defense.
Correct.
Force.
And the idea that not only are the soldiers united, but the people support the military. And that, in addition to what Vincent said, I would say that another area that needs to be looked at is the idea of civil defense.
We're going to move on to that a little bit later.
Sure.
Can we just briefly touch on, you know, the role that you think the training under the NDAA will play, you know, Indo-PACOM's authority to train with Taiwan?
Well, if you look at history, in 2014, after the Russians took Crimea and the eastern part of Ukraine, the United States government instituted a training program of Ukrainian military. Initially, the Congress authorized lethal training. President Obama denied it, and then when President Trump came in, he approved it. So from about 2016 to 2022, the United States military and the intelligence agencies were providing training to the Ukrainians in anticipation of someday in the future a combat scenario. And guess what? In February of last year, that scenario occurred. So luckily, the training that they got helped push back the Russians and, you know, killed a few generals in the process because they were taught sniper training. So the training that the U.S. military provides Taiwan, I think, will make Taiwan's military more lethal, which goes back to my point about the one-child policy that the Communist Party in China instituted, and also will build confidence in their ability to repel any kind of aggression by the PLA.
Vincent, so we talked about the 8 years of training for the Ukrainians. We've got 3-4 years until 2027.
Well, well, but don't forget, I mean, we've had 20, 30 years prior to that where people have cycled in and out like myself as conscripts. And so we actually
For 2 months, 4 months, maybe
well,
1
for
year.
4 months, but for example, when I trained, it was a year, and prior to that, it was 2 years. We had 3 years prior to that. So you do have a large segment of the population that has had military training at one point or another. And so the idea is, how do you effectively use these people and ensure that they don't become cannon fodder, to be honest. And so this idea of not only having enhanced conscription from 4 months back to 1 year, but also having regular kind of checkups for former conscripts like myself. For example, having in the past, I think it was about a week for every 1 year or two, and you would have 4 training sessions in total. I think the idea now is to have a more regularized training system. In the past, it was all lottery based. So if you're unlucky, you would get a call back every year. If you're extremely lucky, you would never get a call back. And so there was no real systematic approach to it. And so this idea that having a systematic approach, increasing the training capabilities, ensuring that when you go back for either 1 week, 2 weeks, or however long you need to go back to, you're actually getting kind of a real updated training regimen that's consistent, I think, with what the military hopes to see these days. And then having a clear role for you if an invasion scenario were to break out. I think all of this would be key to effectively utilizing Taiwan's millions of reserve troops.
Okay, let's talk about this more in the next section. Now let's turn to credibility and communication. How do these fit into deterrence? Well, deterrence, quote, prevents adversary action through the presentation of a credible threat of unacceptable counteraction and belief that the cost of the action outweighs the perceived benefits. That message has to be communicated to the enemy. Now, the Swiss Army has a formidable reputation. Let's get a taste of some of their communication. That was a video by the Marine and Swiss Army. We've caught glimpses of different kinds of deterrence by Israel and Switzerland. And while they were, you could say, marketing social media efforts, messaging opportunities also include weapons system testing, alert posturing, and of course, shows of force. Gemont, let's talk about how powerful, these final 2 elements are of deterrence, credibility and communication. Can you give us some examples?
Well, in terms of credibility, the history shows that, for example, the Taiwanese Air Force was involved in combat operations in the Gulf in the 90s. Many people don't know that, but it's well known in certain circles. Taiwan is used as a training location by the Singaporean military because of the mountains that are here. So. And so Taiwan has both the Swiss.
But if people don't know this, then it's, in a sense, it's lost.
But I'm making that statement now.
Right. Okay.
I'm helping you.
Okay,
I'm helping
okay.
Taiwan. And furthermore, Taiwan has the terrain of actually both Switzerland and Israel. In the sense that Switzerland has these high mountains. You have over 280 mountains with 3,000 meters. Switzerland is mostly mountainous. And of course, Israel is half the country is along the coastline. So both those countries are great examples for Taiwan. And in the past, Taiwan has had close relationships with the Israeli military and has gotten a lot of training from them. And so I think all these factors should promote an idea of a credible military because of the connectivity that Taiwan has had in the past with other militaries, and it's demonstrated throughout its reactions to what the PLA has been trying to do.
Vincent, why doesn't Taiwan promote this more?
I think we're trying. I mean, if you look at the propaganda videos from both the Swiss as well as Israelis, I mean, they did a fantastic job, like top notch. But if you look at our military videos, I think they're getting a lot better. If you look at them in comparison to 10, 20 years ago, you'd be like, wow, this is like Hollywood, level almost. But I think the idea is this. There's two anticipated audiences. The first is domestic, right? And so right now our videos are aimed at a domestic audience. We want to build respect for our military. We want to build its professionalism. We have recruiting objectives and so forth. But I think they're going to have limited utility across the strait. And so when you talk about deterrence in terms of being able to communicate our deterrence across the strait, I think it's going to take a bit more than propaganda videos. I think it's going to come down really to political determination, to resolve, to morale, to having kind of unity of spirit, nationalism and so forth. And I think all of that is much more complicated than filming a couple of nice and snazzy looking videos, not to say they're not important. So I do think that as we think about this, we need to divide that into these two categories. That, I think we're doing a better job communicating this domestically, effectively. I don't think we're quite there in terms of communicating this across the strait. I think it's going to take a lot of political resolve to be able to communicate our resolve to defend ourselves effectively to the PLA.
I think the NDAA was a good example of a huge deterrent to the PLA and the CCP, because it sent a message that the U.S. is going to be training and conducting exercises with the Taiwanese military. And I think it's a great morale booster also for the Taiwanese people and the Taiwanese military to know that this is coming. And I think the reason that occurred was because Taiwanese political leadership and the U.S. political leadership came to an agreement that was born in the Congress and signed by the president.
Talking about, a deterrent from the NDAA, there's also, the very latest timeline, Vincent, that was given by a U.S. General, Mike Minihan of the U.S. Air Force, and he talked about 2025. Do you see that as part of U.S.'s messaging to deter China?
Admiral Davidson had said 27. Now this Air Force, I think, Logistics General had said 25. And certainly I think Biden and Blinken had also mentioned different timeframes, 27 at some point.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. If you've enjoyed our show and would like to get more highlights, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Taiwan Talks 2022. Now this is a question to you. Do you think Taiwan can build a credible deterrence to prevent a 2027 Chinese invasion? Please let us know in the comments section. Take care and see you next time.